Woodcraft, helping you make woodwork.
You're probably all wondering, where is John's lathe? Seems like every demo I do usually involves a lathe of some kind. Well, today we're not going to use a machine at all. Today we're just going to kind of talk about lumber a little bit. Most of you guys are probably pretty familiar with the ins and outs of buying lumber these days, but you know, it's probably something that we should from time to time spend a little bit of time thinking about, a little bit of time talking about. And so that's what we're going to do today. All right, so I've got a little handout prepared for you. If you guys just kind of pass those around there, Clayton. I hope there's enough copies. If not, we'll make some more copies after the presentation. All right. So buying hardwood lumber, like I say, can be a little bit confusing sometimes if you're not real familiar with the terminology that you'll find used at, you know, the lumber yard or even places like Woodcraft. We tend to use some terminology that you may or may not recognize right off the bat. And if so, you need to ask us those questions. But hopefully we're going to eliminate some of that confusion for you here today. Okay. Now, forgive me, I'm going to be following along with the same handout that you guys have to make sure that I cover all the salient points today and that I don't leave anything out. Okay. So bear with me. So hardwoods, by definition anyway, hardwoods are woods that come from what they call deciduous trees. In other words, trees that shed their leaves each fall, and then they grow, you know, obviously in the spring the leaves pop back out. Those are called deciduous trees. Those are the trees that hardwoods come from. Cherry, maple, oak, walnut, those are some of the most commonly used hardwoods in furniture making these days. Okay, you'll find them, of course, you know, here at Woodcraft we'll have all of those. You'll find them at a lot of lumber yards and so forth. But those are hardwoods. Okay, and interestingly enough, by definition anyway, woods like balsa, basswood, tupelo, woods that we generally consider fairly soft in their, you know, in usage anyway, those are technically, and again by definition, those are hardwoods because those trees actually lose their leaves each fall and so forth. So while balsa is, you know, you can take a piece of balsa and just go like that, that's a hardwood by definition. Okay.
Are all deciduous trees hardwoods? Or not?
Yes, yeah. All deciduous trees would be hardwoods. Softwoods, on the other hand, are going to come from coniferous trees, and we're going to get into softwoods a little bit later on. Okay. So hardwoods you're going to find usually used for furniture making, flooring, you know, those types of things, cabinetry, all those types of uses. A lot of hardwoods are going to have really beautiful grain to them. Think about things like bird's eye maple, quilted maple, pomel or waterfall figure bubinga. Okay, those woods are highly prized for that beautiful figure that they have, and they're usually used somewhat sparingly because highly figured woods like that are rarer than their typical counterpart. So they're more expensive, they're a little bit harder to find, and so you'll use them primarily as, well, to repeat the word primary, hardwoods. Okay, drawer fronts, where you might have the drawer box itself might actually be built from, say, plywood, Baltic birch plywood, or poplar, or, you know, something of that nature, which is generally considered a secondary wood. Okay, so these highly figured woods are very prized for that figure that they have. Now hardwoods are sold in random width and length. There's really very little uniformity among hardwood board sizes. Okay, you'll find them in all different widths and lengths and so forth. And hardwoods are measured in what they call a board foot, and they're also measured in quarters of an inch of thickness. All right. So a board foot is equivalent to 144 square inches. Okay, 144 square inches. And so you'll hear the terms 4/4, 8/4, 12, 16, 10 quarter. You'll hear terms like that, 5/4, 6/4. And what that simply means is that a 4/4 board is 1 inch thick, 8/4, 2 inches, 6/4, 1.5 inches. Okay, so it's measured, the thickness of a hardwood is measured in quarters of an inch. So when you hear those terms, it's fairly simple to convert that over to, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches, and so on and so forth. Okay, and you'll find hardwoods generally 16/4 would be a really, really thick piece of hardwood. That's 4 inches. You're getting into something more like a beam then, a hardwood beam. You're not going to find that very often. If you need 16/4 hardwood, you're probably going to have that specially milled. This is just not usually readily available. Okay, 12/4, a little bit easier to find. 8/4, we stock quite a bit of 8/4 here, the 2 inch thick. So not terribly difficult. All right, so how do we calculate a board foot? Does everybody know how to calculate a board foot? Yeah? All right, then I suppose we don't need to spend a lot of time drawing it up on the board over here then. It's simply the length times the width divided by 144. That gives you your board foot. Okay, in the example I've got in your handout there, I used a board 7 inches wide and 97 inches long. If we use the calculation to figure the board foot on that, 7 times 97 is 679, divided by 144 comes up to 4.715 board feet, and at 1 inch thick. If you have 8/4 lumber, your calculation is the same, except that when you get done with that, you need to multiply that result by 2, or by 3, or by 4. Okay, because the board foot is actually a measure of volume. Again, equivalent to 144 square inches. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, all right. So grading of hardwoods. Hardwoods are graded just a little bit differently than dimensional type lumber. Okay, hardwoods are graded according to the minimum sizes and percentage of clear-cut lumber, clear-cut usable lumber that you can get off of a given board. Okay, the best grade of a hardwood is known as firsts and seconds. Okay, firsts and seconds must have 85% clear cutting, and they must be at least 6 inches wide and at least 8 feet long in order to be graded as first and second. Okay, number one common is the lowest grade of hardwood lumber. Okay, and it must yield at least 65% clear-cut wood. Okay, there are some other grades of hardwoods that you'll find out there. For instance, rough-cut lumber. And I kind of picked up a few pieces off of our lumber rack just to kind of illustrate what, and this is a pretty good sized piece, but it was the closest thing we had to what I would consider rough cut. Okay, rough cut lumber refers to lumber that has not been surfaced at all. Okay, this has not been surfaced on either of the faces or the edges. Okay, so this would be considered rough cut lumber. And you can very often find, 4/4, 8/4 rough cut lumber. And if you have the ability and the machinery in your shop to machine that down to surface that board, rough cut lumber can sometimes be a little bit less expensive to buy. Okay, just because it's rough cut from the mill and there hasn't been somebody paid, to actually surface that board. So it can be a little bit cheaper to buy. You obviously have to have the equipment to be able to do that once you get it home in your shop. Okay, but that's rough cut. Surfaced on two sides. Surfaced on two sides, this board right here would be a good example of surfaced on two sides. Okay, you can see that this face as well as this face have both been surfaced either through a planer or a sander, more than likely a big planer of some kind, but the two edges are still rough. That's an example of surfaced on two sides. Okay, S2S, you'll see that referred to. Then there's also S4S, which is surfaced on four sides. And now we're getting into, and obviously this is quite a bit smaller piece of wood, but we don't sell a lot of S4S other than in what we refer to as shorts, okay, which is what this is. S4S, you'll find both faces have been planed and or sanded, as well as the edges have been jointed, okay? So this is surfaced on four sides, okay? Surfaced on four sides is going to carry a premium price because somebody somewhere has been paid to take rough lumber and surface it to S4S. That's why you pay more for boards like this, okay? Because somebody has done that labor for you. All right. Now, we all know, at least I hope we all know, that some woods are much harder than other woods. Okay? Again, let's go back to our example of balsa wood. Remember, by definition, balsa wood is a hardwood. Ipe, one of the hardest woods in the world, also known as Brazilian walnut, is an extremely hard wood. I'm talking extremely hardwood. It's extremely hard. Nick's question was, how hard is it? It's extremely hard. So how do we, when looking at a board that a type of wood that we've never used before, how do we know just how hard it is? How are all these different woods graded by hardness? There's actually a scale that we can use called the Janka scale. Has anybody ever heard of the Janka scale? There's a copy of it on the back of your handout there. The Janka scale it simply reflects how hard different types of woods are. There's a test that's performed to determine how much force it takes to embed a 0.444 inch steel ball to half the diameter of that ball into the surface of a piece of wood. And that force is measured in pounds force. And it's the number that you'll see on that Janka scale is the amount of pounds force it takes to embed that ball halfway into the wood. Okay? Red oak is typically used as a benchmark for this type of scale. So that's where all of the different numbers come from. The higher the number, the harder the wood is. And these woods are dried to approximately 12% moisture content before the test is performed. 10 to 12% is or 8 to 12%, I suppose, is usable lumber for woodworking. And so at 12%, that's where they determine the hardness of the wood. And that's done on the Janka scale. Again, the higher the number, the harder the wood.